Money talks, but character screams much louder at 30,000 feet. We have all seen rude passengers, like seat kickers or those treating crew like servants. But on Flight 702 to Chicago, entitlement turned violent. One man, flaunting his platinum status, decided to burn a helpless boy with scalding coffee simply for existing near him. He believed his wealth made him untouchable. He was wrong. The woman in uniform was not just serving drinks. She was serving justice. She taught him a lesson no amount of money could ever fix. This is the story of how a bully got broken. The rain was hammering against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of JFK's Terminal 4, turning the tarmac into a grey, watery blur. Inside, the air was recycled and stale, filled with the frantic energy of delayed travelers. But Preston Galloway didn't do delayed. Preston Galloway did expedited. At 45, Preston was the kind of man who wore his net worth like a suit of armor. Today, that armor was a bespoke Italian charcoal three-piece, uncomfortably tight around the shoulders, and a pair of polished Oxfords that cost more than most people's first cars. He stood at the counter of Gate C14, his face a mask of controlled fury, his knuckles white as he gripped his platinum American Express card. "I don't care about the weather patterns over Ohio," Preston sneered, his voice loud enough to turn heads 3 rows back in the waiting area. "I have a meeting at the Willis Tower at 4. If I am not on a plane in 20 minutes, I'm going to buy this airline just to fire you." The gate agent, a young woman named Sarah with dark circles under her eyes and a name tag that was slightly crooked, typed frantically on her keyboard. "Mr. Galloway, I understand your frustration, but the storm has grounded all outbound flights for the last hour. We are boarding Flight 702 momentarily. But we have a seating issue due to the equipment change. The original aircraft had a mechanical failure." Preston leaned over the counter, invading her personal space. "Equipment change. I booked first class, seat 1A. No one sits in front of me. No one." "That's the problem, sir," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "The new aircraft is a smaller regional jet. There is no first-class cabin. It's an all-economy configuration. We've refunded the difference to you're putting me in cattle class." Preston's voice cracked like a whip. The chatter at the gate stopped. People looked up from their phones. Sitting on a vinyl bench nearby were Maria and her son, Toby. Maria was small, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a faded grey hoodie. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from working double shifts. Next to her, 10-year-old Toby was clutching a worn-out comic book. Toby was a quiet kid with wide, observant brown eyes and skin the color of deep mahogany. He was wearing a bulky winter coat that was slightly too big for him, likely a hand-me-down. Toby looked up at the shouting man. He had never seen anyone so red in the face. "Mum," Toby whispered, tugging on Maria's sleeve. "Is that man okay?" "Shh, baby," Maria said, pulling him closer. "Just look at your book. Don't stare." Preston spun around, catching Toby's gaze. "What are you looking at?" he barked. Toby flinched, shrinking into his coat. "Mr. Galloway, please." Sarah, the agent, pleaded. "We can get you a voucher for—" "I don't want a voucher." Preston slammed his hand on the counter. "I want to get to Chicago. Give me the boarding pass. But mark my words, I will have your job by tomorrow morning." He snatched the paper from her hand. "Seat 3A, a window seat, in economy." Preston stormed away from the counter, almost tripping over Maria's carry-on bag, which was resting near her feet. He kicked it aside. "Watch your trash," he muttered, brushing off his pant leg as if the bag had contaminated him. Maria gasped, reaching for the bag. "Excuse me, sir." There was plenty of room to walk around. Preston didn't even look back. He stood at the front of the boarding lane, tapping his foot, checking his Rolex every 10 seconds. He was a man who believed the world was a vending machine. He put money in, and he got what he wanted. When the machine malfunctioned, he didn't fix it. He kicked it. But Flight 702 wasn't a vending machine. And the crew waiting on board wasn't going to be as passive as the gate agent. Standing at the aircraft door, greeting passengers as they boarded, was Brenda B. Higgins. Brenda was 52 years old, with silver streaks in her hair and a posture that suggested she had survived everything from emergency landings to bachelorette parties gone wrong. She had been flying for 25 years. She could spot a troublemaker from the moment they stepped onto the bridge. She saw Preston Galloway coming down the jet bridge, storming like a bull entering an arena. "Welcome aboard," Brenda said, her voice a practiced melody of calm. Preston ignored her, shoving past to scan the cabin. He looked at the narrow seats, the grey upholstery, the lack of legroom. He looked as if he had just walked into a sewer. "Unbelievable," he muttered, jamming his bag into the overhead bin above row 3, taking up the space meant for 3 passengers. "Sir," Brenda said, stepping forward, "you'll need to turn that bag sideways so others can fit their—" "It fits," Preston snapped, sitting down in 3A and pulling out his phone. "Don't touch it." Brenda paused. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. She had dealt with nervous flyers, drunks, and people having panic attacks. But she had a special radar for pure, distilled malice. She mentally flagged seat 3A, red light. A few moments later, Maria and Toby boarded. They were the last to get on. They walked down the aisle, Maria apologizing to everyone she passed for her backpack, bumping them. "Looks like we're here, baby," Maria said, checking their tickets. 3B and 3C. Brenda watched as the realization hit Preston. He wasn't just in economy. He was in a row of 3, and he was about to have seatmates. Preston looked up from his phone as Maria and Toby stopped at his row. He looked at Maria's faded hoodie. He looked at Toby's bulky coat and his dark skin. A look of pure revulsion washed over Preston's face. It wasn't just annoyance. It was a sneer of superiority that bordered on hatred. "You have got to be kidding me," Preston said, loud enough for the whole front cabin to hear. "I paid $2,000 for this flight, and I'm sitting next to this." Maria stiffened. She placed a protective hand on Toby's shoulder. "We have tickets, sir. Just like you. Just like me." Preston scoffed. "I highly doubt that." Brenda was there in a second. "Is there a problem here, folks?" "Yes," Preston said, pointing at Toby. "I need to be moved. I can't sit next to a child. I have work to do, and I certainly didn't sign up to be squeezed in by—" He waved his hand dismissively at them. "The flight is completely full." "Sir," Brenda said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming firmer. "Everyone needs to take their assigned seats so we can push back. We are already late." Preston glared at Brenda, then at Maria. He shifted his body toward the window, jamming his knees against the seat in front of him, creating a physical wall. "Fine. Just keep him away from me. If he touches my suit, I'm suing the airline." Maria helped Toby into the middle seat. 3B. Toby looked terrified. He sat on his hands, squeezing his knees together, trying to make himself as small as possible so he wouldn't brush against the man in the expensive suit. The cabin doors closed. The engines whined to life. The pressure in the cabin began to rise, but it was nothing compared to the pressure building in row 3. The flight from New York to Chicago is not long, usually just over 2 hours. But for Toby, the first 45 minutes felt like a lifetime. The plane, a smaller Embraer, 175, was susceptible to the wind. As they climbed through the storm clouds, the cabin shook violently. The seatbelt sign remained on. Preston Galloway had opened his laptop the second the wheels left the ground, ignoring the crew's instructions. He was typing furiously. His elbows flared out. Every time he typed, his left elbow jabbed into Toby's space. Toby didn't complain. He sat perfectly still, staring at the safety card in the seat pocket. He was a good kid. He knew his mum was stressed they were flying to Chicago for his grandmother's funeral. A ticket Maria had scraped together, every last penny to buy. He knew he couldn't cause trouble. "Mom," Toby whispered, "I'm thirsty." "I know, baby," Maria whispered back, rubbing his back. "As soon as the turbulence stops, the lady will bring the cart." Preston huffed, slamming his fingers onto the keys. "Can you keep him quiet? Some of us are trying to run a business here." Maria took a deep breath. "He's whispering, sir. He's 10. He's annoying," Preston shot back, not looking away from his screen. 10 minutes later, the pilot, Captain Anderson, came over the intercom. "Folks, we've found a bit of smooth air. I'm going to turn off the seatbelt sign so the flight attendants can start their service, but please keep your belts fastened while seated." The chime dinged. The tension in the cabin eased slightly. Brenda and her colleague, a younger man named David, began the service from the front. They rolled the cart to row 1. Preston slammed his laptop shut. "Finally, I need a scotch. Double. Neat." When the cart reached row 3, Brenda locked the wheels. She looked at Preston. "What can I get for you?" "Scotch. Double. And don't give me the cheap stuff," Preston demanded. "I have doers," Brenda said calmly. "Fine. And water on the side. No ice." Brenda served him. She placed the drinks on his tray table. Then she turned to Toby with a warm smile, her demeanor changing instantly from professional indifference to genuine warmth. "And for you, young man?" she asked. Toby looked at the cart. Can I have an apple juice? Please, you sure can," Brenda said. She poured the juice into a cup with a lid. "And for you?" "Mom, just water, please," Maria said. As Brenda handed the drinks over, the plane hit an unexpected pocket of air. It wasn't a major drop, just a sudden jolt. The beverage cart rattled. Toby, reaching for his juice, bumped his arm against the armrest. His hand slipped. He didn't spill his juice, but his movement caused his elbow to brush against Preston's sleeve. It was a feather-light touch, barely a graze, but Preston reacted as if he had been stabbed. "Watch it!" Preston roared. He jerked his arm away, and in doing so, he knocked his own cup of water over. The water splashed onto his tray table and dribbled onto his pants. "My suit!" Preston screamed. "You stupid little look what you did." The cabin went silent. "I'm so sorry," Maria cried, grabbing a napkin. "He didn't mean to. It was the bump. Don't touch me." Preston swatted Maria's hand away. He stood up, stooping under the overhead bin. "This is exactly what I said would happen. You put me next to animals." Brenda stepped around the cart, her face hard as stone. "Sir, sit down. The seatbelt sign is still on." "I am not sitting next to him." Preston pointed a trembling finger at Toby. Toby was shaking, tears welling up in his eyes. "Sir, it is water," Brenda said, her voice cutting through the noise. "It will dry. You need to sit down immediately." Preston sat, but he was seething. His face was a deep shade of crimson. He grabbed his scotch and downed it in one gulp. He glared at Toby. "You ruin one more thing of mine, kid, and you'll regret it." Toby shrank against his mother. Maria had her arm wrapped around him, glaring at Preston with the ferocity of a mother lion. But she was trapped. She couldn't move. The service continued. Brenda moved the cart back, but she kept glancing at row 3. She signaled to David, "Keep an eye on 3A." 20 minutes passed. The plane stabilized. The atmosphere in row 3 was toxic. Preston was vibrating with rage, fueled by the alcohol and his own inflated sense of victimization. He felt disrespected. He felt the world owed him an apology. He ordered another scotch. Brenda hesitated, then served him a single. "Last one, sir." Preston sneered. "I'll tell you when it's the last one." He had a cup of hot coffee on his tray now, steaming. He had ordered it black. "To wake me up for the meeting you people almost made me miss," he had said. Toby had opened his comic book again. He was trying to escape into the world of superheroes, where bad guys got caught and good guys won. He turned a page. The paper made a crinkling sound. Preston twitched. Toby turned another page. "Stop it," Preston hissed. "Stop what?" Toby whispered. Terrified. "The noise. The rustling. Stop it." "I'm just reading," Toby said, his voice barely audible. "You're existing," Preston muttered. Then Toby did something unforgivable in Preston's eyes. He sneezed. It was a small sneeze. Toby covered his mouth with his elbow, just like he was taught, but in the tight confines of economy class. His head bobbed forward. Preston looked at the coffee steaming on his tray. He looked at the boy. A dark, twisted idea formed in his alcohol-clouded brain. He wanted to punish. He wanted to hurt. He wanted to show this nobody who was in charge. "Disgusting," Preston said loudly. "Bless you, baby," Maria said. "He's spreading germs," Preston announced to the cabin. "I can't believe this." "Sir, please," Maria said, her patience snapping. "Leave him alone." "Or what?" Preston turned to her, his eyes cold and dead. "What are you going to do? You can't even afford to buy him a proper coat." "That is enough," Maria said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Oh, you want to fight?" Preston laughed, a cruel, wet sound. He reached for his coffee cup. The liquid was still piping hot. It had been served less than 3 minutes ago. He didn't drink it. He looked at Toby, who was staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Oops," Preston said, and then, with a flick of his wrist that was too deliberate to be an accident, he tipped the cup. It happened in slow motion for Maria, but for everyone else, it was a blur of motion. The styrofoam cup tilted. The dark, steaming liquid cascaded over the rim. It didn't go onto the floor. It didn't go onto the tray. It splashed directly onto Toby's lap. The liquid soaked instantly into his jeans, 190 degrees Fahrenheit. For a split second, there was absolute silence. The brain takes a moment to register pain that intense. Then Toby screamed. It wasn't a cry. It was a shriek, a primal, high-pitched sound of pure agony that tore through the pressurized cabin like a siren. "My legs! It burns! It burns!" Toby thrashed in his seat, clawing at his legs. Maria screamed. "Toby!" She scrambled to unbuckle him, her hands shaking. "Get it off! Get it off!" The smell of roasted coffee filled the air, mixed with the sudden, sharp scent of fear. passengers from the surrounding rows jumped up. "Oh my God!" someone yelled. "He burned him." Preston sat back in his seat, holding the empty cup. He didn't look horrified. He didn't look sorry. He looked satisfied. He pulled a napkin from his pocket and dabbed a tiny speck of coffee from his own cuff. "He bumped me again," Preston said, his voice calm, chillingly casual. "Clumsy kid. You did that on purpose." A man from across the aisle, a large guy in a flannel shirt, stood up, his face purple with rage. "I saw you. You looked right at him and poured it. Sit down. Peasant." Preston snapped. It was turbulence. Toby was sobbing now, a ragged, gasping sound. "Mommy, it hurts. Please make it stop." Maria was frantic, trying to pull Toby's soaked jeans away from his blistering skin. "I need water. I need help. Somebody help my son." From the galley. Brenda didn't walk. She ran. She had heard the scream. She knew that scream. That wasn't a "I dropped my toy" scream. That was a trauma scream. She pushed past the cart, sprinting down the aisle. When she saw the scene, her heart hammered against her ribs. But her training took over instantly. She saw the empty cup in Preston's hand. She saw the coffee soaking the boy's lap. She saw the smirk on Preston's face. Rage, hot and white, flared in her chest. But Brenda clamped it down. Now wasn't the time for rage. Now was the time for control. David First Aid Kit, ice packs. Now. Brenda barked the command with the authority of a drill sergeant. She reached row 3. "Mum, let me through." Brenda didn't ask Preston to move. She grabbed his shoulder with a grip of iron. "Get out of the seat." Preston looked at her hand on his expensive suit. "Excuse me, you don't touch me. I'm a platinum. I don't care if you're the King of England." Brenda lowered her voice to a terrifying whisper. "You have exactly 3 seconds to get out of that seat before I drag you out. 1. Preston saw something in Brenda's eyes. It wasn't customer service. It was the look of a woman who was ready to go to war. He scoffed, grabbed his laptop, and stood up, moving into the aisle. "Fine, I wanted to move anyway. This row is a disaster." Brenda ignored him. She knelt beside Toby. "Honey, look at me. Look at B. I'm going to help you." "Okay." David arrived with the kit. Brenda worked fast. She used her scissors to cut the pant leg, exposing the skin. It was angry red, blistering already. 2nd-degree burns. "Oh God." Maria wept, holding Toby's head against her chest. "My baby." "David, get burn gel. Soaked towels. Cold water," Brenda ordered. She applied the cooling gel gently. Toby whimpered, his body shaking. "You're doing so good. Toby," Brenda cooed. "You're so brave." In the aisle, Preston was standing, looking inconvenienced. He tapped the shoulder of the man in row 4. "Hey, switch seats with me. You take the crying kid." The man in row 4, the guy in flannel, stood up. He was 6'4". He looked down at Preston. "If you say one more word, buddy, I'm going to put you in the overhead bin." Preston blinked. He looked around. Every face in the cabin was turned toward him. Disgust, anger, loathing. "This is harassment," Preston announced. "I am the victim here. He spilled water on me, and then he knocked my coffee. It was an accident." "It was no accident," Brenda said. She stood up. She had finished dressing Toby's burns for the moment. She turned to face Preston in the narrow aisle. She was 5'5", but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. "I have been flying for 25 years, Brenda said, her voice steady, carrying to the back of the plane. "I know what an accident looks like. An accident is a spill. An accident is a fumble. She stepped closer to him. You held the cup, you tilted it, and you watched it burn him. You can't prove that, Preston sneered, though his confidence was wavering slightly. It's your word against mine. And who do you think the airline is going to believe, the man who spends $50,000 a year with them? Or the waitress? Brenda smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Sir, you seem to have forgotten something about modern aviation. She pointed a finger toward the ceiling of the cabin, then to the passengers around them. This isn't the 1980s. You aren't just surrounded by passengers. You're surrounded by witnesses. She gestured to the seats across the aisle. 3 different people were holding up their phones. The red recording dots were blinking. And, Brenda continued, you seem to have forgotten who is in charge of this metal tube once the doors close. You think you're the boss because you have a credit card. Up here, I am the boss, and you just assaulted a minor in federal airspace. Preston's face went pale. Assault, don't be ridiculous. It was coffee. It was a weapon, Brenda said. She reached for the interphone handset on the wall. She punched 2 buttons. Captain, she said into the receiver, her eyes never leaving Preston's face. We have a code red in the cabin. Assault on a minor resulting in bodily injury. Perpetrator is hostile. I need law enforcement on the ground upon arrival. And Captain, I'm going to need the restraint cuffs. The cabin gasped. Preston's jaw dropped. Restraints. You can't restrain me. I'm Preston Galloway. Mr. Galloway, Brenda said, hanging up the phone and reaching into the storage locker for a set of heavy-duty zip-tie restraints. You are about to find out that gravity applies to everyone. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Preston panicked. He looked for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. He was 30,000 feet in the air, trapped in a metal tube with 100 people who hated him, and a flight attendant who had just decided to end his career. No, Preston shouted. I will not. This is kidnapping. He lunged at Brenda. It was the biggest mistake of his life. Preston Galloway's lunge was clumsy, fueled by liquid courage and blind rage. But it was dangerous. He aimed for Bee's chest, his hands curled into claws, intending to shove her backward into the metal galley carts. But Brenda B. Higgins hadn't just poured Diet Cokes for 25 years. Before she was a flight attendant, she had raised 3 boys as a single mother in the Bronx. She knew how to handle a tantrum, whether it came from a toddler or a 45-year-old CEO. As Preston threw his weight forward, Bee didn't step back. She stepped to the side, pivoting on her heel. She caught Preston's outstretched wrist with her left hand and used his own momentum against him. It was a move straight out of a self-defense seminar she'd taken after 9/11. She twisted his arm behind his back, forcing his shoulder joint to lock. "Ah, you're breaking my arm!" Preston shrieked, his face smashing into the plastic wall of the lavatory. "I am securing the cabin," Bee yelled, her voice dropping that customer service sweetness entirely. David cuffs now. David, the young flight attendant, was shaking, but he tossed the heavy plastic flex cuffs to Bee. Preston kicked backward, his heel catching Bee in the shin. She winced, but didn't let go. "Stop fighting, or I will hog-tie you right here on the floor." Suddenly, the flannel guy from row 4, the large man who had stood up earlier, was there. He didn't ask for permission. He simply placed a hand the size of a dinner plate onto the back of Preston's neck and pinned him to the wall. "You heard the lady," the man growled. His name was Mike, a retired linebacker for a university team, now a construction foreman. He wasn't someone Preston could bully. "Stop moving," with Mike holding him. B zipped the restraints around Preston's wrists. The sound of the plastic zip was loud and final. She pulled it tight. Too tight. That's cutting off my circulation. Preston howled. It's standard procedure for a level 2 threat, B said, breathless but composed. You are now under arrest in the jurisdiction of this aircraft. They hauled him up. Preston looked wild, his tie crooked, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, his expensive suit rumpled. You're going to regret this. Preston spat, his eyes darting around the cabin. Do you know who I am? I'm Preston Galloway. I run Galloway Logistics. I'm going to buy this airline and turn it into a scrap heap. And you? He looked at B. You'll be lucky if you can get a job scrubbing toilets. Walk, B said, ignoring his threats. They didn't put him back in seat 3A. That was too good for him. B marched him to the very back of the plane, past rows of staring passengers. Every single person watched him go. There was no sympathy in their eyes. There was only judgment. A teenager in row 12 held up his phone, filming the entire walk of shame. B shoved him into the rear jump seat, the small, uncomfortable, fold-down seat that flight attendants use during takeoff and landing. It faced the aisle. Sit, she ordered. She strapped him in with the 4-point harness, locking him tight against the hard plastic. David, sit in the row across from him. Watch him. If he spits, put a mask on him. If he screams, ignore him. But do not let him out of that seat until law enforcement boards the plane. B turned on her heel and marched back to the front. The cabin erupted into spontaneous applause. It started slow, just a few claps from the back. But within seconds, the entire economy class was cheering. B didn't smile. She raised a hand for silence. Folks, please, we have a medical emergency. I need quiet. She returned to row 3. Maria was still weeping, rocking Toby back and forth. The boy's whimpering had turned into the shallow, rapid breathing of shock. Is there a doctor on board? B announced over the PA system, her voice cracking slightly. A hand shot up in row 8. A woman with glasses and a severe bob, cut unbuckled. I'm a burn specialist, doctor. Emily Carter. Thank God, B whispered. Please, row 3. Doctor. Carter moved fast. She examined Toby's legs. The skin on his thigh was blistering rapidly. Angry red welts rising against the dark skin. The coffee had soaked into the denim, holding the heat against the flesh like a scalding compress. We need to get these pants off, but the fabric is sticking. Doctor, Carter said, her voice clinical and precise. B, I need sterile scissors and saline, lots of it. For the next hour, the front of the plane became a triage unit. The passengers in row 2 stood up and moved to the back to give them space. A grandmother in row 5 handed Maria a clean, soft blanket. Here, the woman said gently. It smells like lavender. It might calm him down. Maria took it, her hands trembling. Thank you. I don't know why. I don't know why he did that. Because he's a monster, B said, handing Dr. Carter the saline bottles. But monsters don't win. Not on my flight. Doctor. Carter worked efficiently. Toby, brave boy, this is going to be cold. She poured the saline. Toby hissed in pain, gripping his mother's hand so hard his knuckles turned grey. The burns are 2nd degree. Doctor, Carter announced quietly to Maria. He's going to be okay, but he needs a hospital immediately upon landing. The risk of infection is high, and the pain management needs to be intravenous. He's in shock. B nodded. She picked up the interphone again. Captain, we have a confirmed medical emergency. Second-degree burns on a minor. We need paramedics at the gate. And Captain, tell the police to bring the heavy cuffs. Back in the rear jump seat, Preston was fuming. He kicked his feet against the bulkhead. I need water. I have rights. This is kidnapping. David, the young flight attendant, looked up from his magazine. He stared at Preston for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, he reached for his own water bottle, took a long, refreshing sip, and turned the page. You little, Preston screamed. Sir, David said, his voice dripping with newfound confidence. If you continue to shout, I will be forced to gag you with duct tape. It is within the flight manual for unruly passengers. Do you want to test me? Preston clamped his mouth shut. For the first time in his life, his money had no power. He was trapped in a metal tube, hurtling through the sky, and the atmosphere was shifting. He thought he was the shark in the tank. He was just realizing he was actually the bait. The descent into Chicago O'Hare usually offers a beautiful view of the skyline and Lake Michigan. Preston Galloway saw none of it. He was staring at the lavatory door, his wrists chafing against the plastic zip ties. As the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud, the reality of his situation began to sink in. But it wasn't remorse that filled him. It was calculation. He was already drafting the lawsuit in his head. Emotional distress, unlawful imprisonment, defamation. He would sue the airline. He would sue the flight attendant. He would sue the mother for bringing a disruptive child into his space. I'll ruin them all, Preston thought. I'll have that flight attendant firing me coffee by next week. The wheels touched the tarmac with a screech of rubber. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the gate. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was stern. We have arrived in Chicago. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. No one is to stand up. We are being met by local law enforcement to remove a security threat from the aircraft. Once they have cleared the cabin, we will proceed with deplaning. A hush fell over the plane. Through the window, passengers could see the flashing blue and red lights of the Port Authority police cars surrounding the jet bridge. An ambulance was parked right next to them. The seatbelt sign pinged off, but nobody moved. The air was thick with anticipation. The forward door opened. The cold Chicago air rushed in, mixing with the stale cabin air. 2 police officers boarded first, big men in tactical vests, Sergeant Miller and Officer Kowalski. They looked like they meant business. Bee met them at the door. She pointed to the back. Perpetrator is in the aft jump seat, restrained. He assaulted a 10-year-old boy with scalding liquid. Sergeant Miller nodded. His face was grim. Paramedics are right behind us. The officers marched down the aisle. The passengers watched in silence. It was a walk of judgment. When they reached the back, Preston straightened up, puffing out his chest as much as he could while tied up. Finally, Preston shouted. Officers, thank God. I want to file charges immediately. That woman, he nodded his head toward the front, kidnapped me. I was assaulted by a passenger, and she tied me up. I demand you arrest her. Sergeant Miller looked at Preston. He looked at the zip ties. He looked at the expensive suit. Then he looked at David, the flight attendant, sitting opposite. Is this the man? Miller asked David. Yes, sir, David said. Attacked a child, then attacked a crew member. Lies! Preston spat. He's lying. Check the cameras. Oh, wait. You don't have cameras. It's my word against theirs. Actually, a voice piped up from row 28, just 2 rows ahead. A young woman with purple hair stood up. She held up an iPhone. I recorded the whole thing. From the moment he started yelling at the kid to the moment he poured the coffee. It's all here. 4K resolution. Preston's face went white. And I have the aftermath, said a man in row 29. I have him lunging at the stewardess, said the teenager in row 12. Sergeant Miller looked back at Preston. A small, dry smile touched the officer's lips. Well, sir, it seems we have plenty of evidence. Stand up. Miller pulled a knife from his belt and cut the zip ties. Before Preston could rub his wrists, Miller grabbed them and slapped on cold, heavy steel handcuffs. Preston Galloway, you are under arrest for assault of a minor, interference with a flight crew, and disorderly conduct. You have the right to remain silent. Don't you read me my rights? Preston screamed as they hauled him down the aisle. I am Preston Galloway. Call my lawyer. Call Judge Henderson. I play golf with the Chief of Police. As they dragged him toward the front. The silence broke. Get him out of here, someone yelled. Shame, cried another. Hope you like prison coffee. Preston struggled, trying to stop as they passed row 3. The paramedics were there now, lifting Toby gently onto a stretcher. The boy's legs were wrapped in sterile gauze. He looked small and fragile. Preston looked at Maria. You did this, he hissed. You set me up. Maria looked up from her son. Her eyes were dry now. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I didn't do anything, Maria said, her voice steady. But I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. The police shoved Preston forward, forcing him off the plane. As he was dragged onto the jet bridge, he saw a man standing by the gate agent's desk. It was a man in a trench coat, holding a camera, not a phone's camera, a professional DSLR with a press pass hanging around his neck. Preston froze. He recognized the man. It was Jack Reynolds, the Jack Reynolds, an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption in Chicago's elite circles. He had a YouTube channel with 5 million subscribers and a segment on prime-time news. Mr. Galloway, Reynolds shouted, snapping photos rapidly. The flash blinded Preston. Jack Reynolds, Chicago Tribune. Is it true you threw boiling coffee on a child because he was sitting next to you? Do you have a comment for the shareholders of Galloway Logistics? No comment, Preston yelled, trying to hide his face with his shoulder. Get that camera away from me. How did you know? Preston muttered to the officer. How is the press here already? Sergeant Miller chuckled as he pushed Preston toward the squad car. Buddy, that video the girl in row 28 took. She live-streamed it. You've been trending on Twitter for the last 40 minutes. The whole world was waiting for you to land. Preston felt his stomach drop. The real-life karma wasn't just coming. It had already arrived. Inside the terminal, the passengers of Flight 702 began to deplane. But they didn't just disperse. They lingered near the gate. Bee walked off the plane last. She looked exhausted. Her uniform was rumpled, her hair slightly messy. She walked over to where the paramedics were loading Toby onto a gurney. Hey, brave boy, Bee said softly. Toby looked up. He was groggy from the pain meds the paramedics had given him, but he smiled. Thank you. Bee. Bee felt tears prick her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, gold pin, her wings. The pin the airline gave to crew members for 10 years of service. You earned these today, she said, pinning it to his coat. You're tougher than any pilot I know. Maria grabbed Bee's hand. I don't know how to thank you. That man. He's gone, Bee said firmly, And he's not coming back. Just then, the man from row 4, Mike, the linebacker, walked up. He was holding a business card. He handed it to Maria. "Ma'am," Mike said. "My name is Mike Ross. I'm not a lawyer, but my wife is. She's a partner at Sterling and Cooper. It's one of the biggest civil litigation firms in the city." Maria looked at the card. It looked expensive. I can't afford a lawyer like that," Mike smiled. "You don't have to. I just texted her the video. She's already drafting the paperwork. She said she's going to take this case pro bono. She wants to bleed that guy dry." Maria looked at Mike, then at B, then at the circle of passengers who were nodding in support. She realized then that she wasn't alone. Preston Galloway had money. He had connections, but he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the power of decent people who have simply had enough. The next morning, Preston Galloway sat in a holding cell at the precinct. The bench was cold steel. The coffee they gave him was lukewarm and tasted like mud. He was still in his ruined suit. They had taken his shoelaces and his belt. He looked like a shell of the man who had terrorized Gate C14, but his arrogance wasn't dead yet. He was waiting for his lawyer, Marcus Sterling, the best defense attorney money could buy. Preston was convinced this would all go away. A settlement, a non-disclosure agreement, a check written to the mother. That's how the world worked. The heavy metal door buzzed and opened. A man walked in. It was Marcus Sterling. He was impeccable in a navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase. "Marcus." Preston stood up, relief washing over him. "Thank God. Get me out of here. The smell is atrocious. I want to sue the police department for unlawful arrest. And I want that flight attendant's head on a platter." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He walked to the metal table, set his briefcase down, and didn't open it. "Sit down, Preston," Marcus said. His voice was cold. Preston frowned. "What's with the attitude? Just pay the bail." "There is no bail." "Preston," Marcus said. "The judge denied it. Flight risk. And given your outburst at the officers during processing, they tacked on resisting arrest." "Denied bail? That's impossible. Who's the judge?" "Judge Pendleton," Marcus said. "He saw the video. Everyone has seen the video. Preston." Marcus pulled a tablet out of his bag. He slid it across the table. On the screen was a YouTube video titled "CEO Burns Child on Flight 702, Full Footage." The view count was at 14.2 million. Preston stared at the screen. He saw himself sneering. He saw himself pouring the coffee. He heard the scream. It sounded even worse on video. It's out of context," Preston stammered. "Context." Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Preston, look at the comments." Preston scrolled. "Identify him. Destroy him. That's Preston Galloway. Galloway Logistics. Boycott Galloway immediately. I hope he rots." "And it gets worse," Marcus said, taking the tablet back. "Because of this video, 3 former assistants of yours have come forward this morning. They're speaking to Jack Reynolds at the Tribune. Allegations of abuse, throwing staplers, verbal harassment. You're being painted as a serial abuser." "They're lying. They just want money." "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, "because here is the real news." He pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. It was on letterhead from Galloway Logistics. "What is this?" Preston asked, picking it up. His hands were shaking. "The board of directors met at 6:00 a.m. this morning," Marcus said. "They voted unanimously to terminate you as CEO. effective immediately. They are triggering the morals clause in your contract. You get no severance, no golden parachute, nothing." Preston felt the blood drain from his face. "They can't do that. I built that company. You poisoned that company," Marcus said. "Stock dropped 12% in opening trading. They are distancing themselves from you as fast as they can." Preston slumped back against the cold wall. "So, fix it. You're my lawyer." Marcus stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "Actually, Preston, that's the other thing. My firm represents the airline's insurance carrier in other matters. It's a conflict of interest. But honestly," Marcus looked at Preston with pure disgust, "even if it wasn't, I wouldn't represent you. I have a 10-year-old son." Marcus turned to the door. "You're on your own. Preston, the court-appointed attorney will be here in an hour. Good luck. You're going to need it." The door slammed shut. Preston Galloway was alone. He had no company. He had no lawyer. He had no allies. But he still had one thing coming: the trial. And B was going to be the star witness. 3 months later, the Cook County Courthouse was a circus. It wasn't just local news anymore. The coffee CEO case had become a national referendum on entitlement. Protesters stood outside holding signs that read, "Justice for Toby" and "No-fly list for bullies." Inside courtroom 402, the air conditioning was struggling to keep up with the body heat of the packed gallery. Preston Galloway sat at the defense table. He looked different. The arrogance was still there, embedded in the set of his jaw. But he was thinner. His hair, usually dyed a rich chestnut, was showing grey roots. He was wearing a suit, but it wasn't bespoke. It was an off-the-rack grey number that fit poorly. His court-appointed attorney, a weary public defender named Mr. Finch, shuffled papers nervously. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Sarah Jenkins. She was known as the Shark of Chicago. She didn't lose high-profile cases. She wore a crimson blazer that looked like armor. Judge Pendleton, a man with a reputation for despising courtroom theatrics, banged his gavel. Court is now in session. The case of the people versus Preston Galloway. The charges were severe: aggravated battery of a child, reckless conduct causing bodily harm, and interference with flight crew members and attendants. Preston had pleaded not guilty. He insisted it was an accident caused by turbulence. He was gambling everything on the act of God defense. The trial moved quickly. Dear Jenkins was methodical. First, she called Dr. Carter. The burn specialist showed photos of Toby's legs. The jury, 6 men. 6 women gasped. 1 juror covered her mouth. The burns were angry, deep, and clearly shaped by a direct pour, not a splash. The liquid was 195 degrees. Dr. Carter testified. It caused immediate dermal necrosis. This child will have scarring for the rest of his life. He has undergone 2 skin graft surgeries already. Preston looked at the ceiling, refusing to look at the photos. Then, Jenkins called Maria. Maria took the stand. She looked strong. She wasn't the terrified woman in the hoodie anymore. She was a mother seeking justice. "He hated us the moment he saw us," Maria said, her voice clear. "He called my son pollution. He told me I couldn't afford a coat. And when Toby sneezed, he just smiled. He smiled and he tipped the cup. Mr. Finch, on cross-examination, tried to poke holes. Miss Hayes, isn't it true that the flight was bumpy? Isn't it possible you perceived malice where there was only physics? I know what I saw. Maria said, locking eyes with Preston. Physics doesn't smirk, but the star witness was Brenda B. Higgins when Bee walked in, wearing her crisp airline uniform. The jury sat up straighter. Ms. Higgins, D.A. Jenkins asked, you have flown for 25 years. You have experienced thousands of hours of turbulence. In your professional opinion, was the aircraft experiencing turbulence at the moment? Mr. Galloway poured the coffee. Bee looked directly at Preston. No. Objection. Mr. Finch stood up. Calls for speculation. The witness is a flight attendant, not a meteorologist. I am an aviation safety professional. Bee shot back before the judge could rule. And I know the difference between a bump and a paw. Sustained, Judge Pendleton said, but he looked interested. Let's move to the evidence, D.A. Jenkins said. She turned to the jury. The defense claims turbulence caused the coffee to spill. They claim the plane dropped. Well, ladies and gentlemen, planes have memories. She signaled to the bailiff. I would like to enter Exhibit G into evidence, the flight data recorder telemetry from Flight 702. Preston froze. He hadn't thought about the black box. D.A. Jenkins projected a graph onto the screen. It showed a flat line, then a jagged line, the earlier turbulence, and then a flat line again. This is the vertical acceleration of the aircraft at the timestamp of the incident, Jenkins said, pointing to the flat line. 0.99 Gs. Perfectly stable. The plane didn't move. Mr. Galloway. Not even an inch. She turned to Preston. The plane didn't spill the coffee. You did. The courtroom erupted. Preston slammed his hand on the table. That's rigged. That data is fake. Mr. Galloway, sit down. Judge Pendleton roared, but Preston was unraveling. He stood up, ignoring his lawyer's frantic tugs on his sleeve. I am the victim here, Preston shouted, his face turning that familiar shade of violent red. I am a job creator. I pay taxes. That kid was kicking my seat. He was a nuisance. I didn't mean to burn him that bad. I just wanted to teach him a lesson. Silence. Absolute, pin-drop silence. Preston froze. He realized what he had just said. I just wanted to teach him a lesson. He had admitted intent. D.A. Jenkins smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the prey walk into the trap. No further questions, Your Honor, she said softly. Mr. Finch put his head in his hands. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman stood up. We find the defendant, Preston Galloway, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing, 2 weeks later, was the final nail in the coffin of Preston Galloway's life as he knew it. Preston stood before Judge Pendleton. He expected a slap on the wrist, maybe probation, maybe community service. He was a wealthy white-collar businessman. Surely they wouldn't put him in real prison. Judge Pendleton adjusted his glasses. He looked down at Preston with profound disappointment. Mr. Galloway, in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of desperation, and crimes of greed. But rarely do I see a crime of such pure, unadulterated meanness. The judge picked up a piece of paper. You used your status as a weapon against a defenseless child. You showed no remorse. You attacked the flight crew. You wasted this court's time with lies about turbulence that were disproven by science. Your Honor, Preston started. Silence. Pendleton barked. I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed under Illinois state law for aggravated battery of a child, to be served consecutively with the federal charges for flight crew interference. Pendleton leaned forward. 5 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are heavily fined, $250,000 payable immediately to the victim's family for medical restitution. Preston's knees gave out. The bailiffs had to hold him up. 5 years. But the karma wasn't done. The criminal trial was just the appetizer. The civil suit was the main course. Mike Ross's wife, the high-powered attorney at Sterling and Cooper, was as good as promised. She filed a civil lawsuit for emotional distress, pain and suffering, and punitive damages. Because Preston had been found guilty in criminal court, the civil liability was a slam dunk. The judgment came down 3 months after he entered Statesville Correctional Center. The jury awarded Maria and Toby $12 million. Preston's assets were liquidated. His penthouse in Manhattan sold. His summer home in the Hamptons sold. His remaining shares in Galloway Logistics seized. His collection of vintage cars auctioned off. His wife, a socialite named Vanessa, who had tolerated him only for the money, filed for divorce the day he was convicted. She took half of what was left before the settlement hit, leaving Preston with literally nothing. 1 year later, the sun was shining at O'Hare International Airport. Bea stood at the front of a classroom. She wasn't wearing her flight attendant uniform. She was wearing a blazer with a badge that read, Director of In-Flight Training. Safety isn't just about seat belts, Bea said to the room full of new recruits. It's about humanity. It's about protecting the people in those seats as if they were your own family. You are the first line of defense against chaos. The recruits took furious notes. Bea was a legend in the airline. The B protocol for handling unruly VIPs was now standard training across the industry. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb of Chicago, a yellow school bus pulled up to a small, neat house. Toby hopped off the bus. He was 11 now. He wore shorts. On his left thigh, there was a visible web of scar tissue, pink against his dark skin. But he didn't hide it. He walked with a slight limp, but he walked tall. Maria was waiting on the porch. She looked 10 years younger. The settlement money had changed their lives not because they bought fancy cars, but because the stress of survival was gone. She had quit her double shifts. She had started a non-profit called the Toby Foundation, which helped victims of workplace and public harassment afford legal counsel. "Hey, baby," Maria said, hugging him. "How was school?" "Good," Toby said. "I got an A on my history project." "That's my boy," she smiled. "Guess who's coming for dinner?" "Auntie B." Toby asked, his eyes lighting up. "Auntie B," Maria confirmed. The final scene. Statesville Correctional Center is a cold, hard place. Preston Galloway was no longer a CEO. He was inmate number 49,201. He was working his assigned prison job. It was ironic, in the way the universe often is. He had been assigned to the cafeteria. It was 5:00 a.m. The breakfast line was forming. Preston stood behind the metal counter, wearing a hairnet and a stained white apron. His hands, once manicured, were rough and chapped. A large inmate, a man serving life for armed robbery, slammed his tray onto the metal rail. "Coffee," the inmate grunted. Preston hesitated. The steam rising from the urn made him flinch. Every time he saw steam, he remembered the scream. He remembered the judge. He remembered the life he threw away for a moment of petty cruelty. "I said coffee, old man!" the inmate shouted. Preston trembled. He picked up the ladle. "Yes, sir," Preston whispered. "Right away, sir." He poured the coffee into the plastic cup, so careful not to spill a single drop. He handed the cup to the inmate, keeping his eyes on the floor. "Watch it," the inmate sneered, grabbing the cup. "Don't you know who I am?" Preston didn't answer. He just wiped the counter. A man who had once thought he owned the sky, now serving lukewarm coffee in hell. And that, my friends, is the story of Preston Galloway. He thought his platinum status gave him the right to burn a child. But he learned the hard way that justice has a way of finding you, even at 30,000 feet. Preston lost his money, his freedom, and his dignity, all because he couldn't show a little kindness. It's a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. I want to know what you think. Did the punishment fit the crime? Should he have gotten more time? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of instant karma, please smash that like button, share this with a friend who hates rude passengers, and subscribe for more stories where the bad guys get exactly what they deserve. Stay kind, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.